and then we can expand.
Yeah,
on
I just
those.
have it's a lot of structural stuff, but there's also just little, trivia bits or I just kind of broke down certain scenes or images. So it's a little bit of everything, but it's like it's
You have the whole gambit on there. It looks like The Shining, but you obsessed over planes, trains, and automobiles. Like she
it's
comes
just
in,
those 3 words or those 4 words written down.
hey Jack, what if I made you a sandwich? I could come watch the movie with you later. God damn it! Then he goes and the guy in the bathroom says the N-word.
All planes and no trains makes me a very dull automobile.
Yeah. The movie would be much funnier with like
With
Stanley
Steve Martin.
Yeah, Steve. Steve, the Eyes Wide Shut thing, but if but like Jack Nicholson as Steve Martin in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. It's like the Jack Torrance.
Oh yeah, you like switch them.
I don't want to go home to my fucking family. I love the little bastard.
They're in the car and he's just smoking, just looking miserable. Well, imagine the bathroom scene with Steve Martin. He comes in and then John Candy steps out of the bathtub.
Oh, I think about it. It's cold in Planes, Trains, Automobiles too. So like the part where he's frozen,
Yeah.
he's on the car. Because I think there's a scene right where Steve Martin's like they're like frozen in the car, but it's the Jack
they're in the
Torrance.
back of with the dog in the back of some big truck.
But it's just and the cuts when it's the next day they're traveling. It's like Tuesday, 3 days before Thanksgiving. We build up to it. I guess since we're coming up on the holiday, and I don't have many things to be thankful for in my life the last couple of years. I don't know. A lot of things have been disenfranchised for me. Like, I wish it wasn't that way, but just life in general. Obviously, a lot of people are going.
But you
through
know
this.
one thing that wasn't disenfranchised for you?
What?
The MCU still
Yeah.
going strong, more franchised than ever.
Yeah, they're like even the old CEO. Let's bring him back. It's okay. Can you imagine like if your boss got fired, like you work at Chipotle, you know, and then like 6 months later, they're like, okay, we're bringing back in Ryan, who's the manager for 32 years. It's the shakeup.
He got fired for assaulting customers. They bring him back.
But a lot of the recent stuff we talked about was sort of existentially negative. It leaned towards a sort of morose or a sadness that kind of was an undercurrent of sort of counterculture coming into the 80s. Woody Allen as a counterculture sort of comedian figure, the Big Chill characters as boomers. So I'm just refreshed to be talking about something, for the most part, that makes me happy. It's a happy movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's from a mostly happy director. It makes me think about my childhood and watching this and happy times like that. It's got that kind of feeling to it. Like some holiday tropes or holiday movies have, I think, aged poorly with the holiday. Like I think obviously something like Christmas Story's become far too overexposed. There's too much Christmas Story, and it hurt the movie over time. It was like, okay, this movie doesn't have that problem. This movie gets richer every year that it's been since it came. I think it's a better movie now than it was in 1987.
Yeah, I think that it grows with you, but I also think it's kind of forgotten. So it has this benefit of feeling underrated. So every time you watch it, you wonder why it's not on TV every year. Even though if it was, you'd probably bitch about it.
Well, it is like considered a classic, but it was never like, it never got to that like Home Alone level. And it wasn't even his biggest movie. I mean, Uncle Buck made more money than this movie. I mean, that's the crazy thing. This wasn't Ferris Bueller. He had like blockbusters coming out at the time.
For the most part, the Pello scene's the only thing. Like I saw this as a kid, but really the Pello scene's the only one I remember as being like iconic or hyped up.
Yeah, totally. Well, when I was a kid, I think what's made this movie get richer, and I think Groundhog Day sort of has this too, with time, where I'm like, man, this is a really good movie. When you're a kid, it's a lot of the comedy, and I think initially when it came out, you're like, okay, it's Steve Martin and John Candy. This is a comedy. It's a road trip movie. He's basically doing Vacation, a variation on that again. It's instead of a family.
He's doing a lot of Bueller too.
Yeah,
the opening right after the opening scene, there's a chase on foot that reminded me a lot of Ferris Bueller racing at the end of the movie.
Yeah, it's weird. This movie's a mix of the commercial stuff, the like Vacation being a big hit and how he wrote that, the energy and pacing of Ferris Bueller, even some of the Home Alone aspects when that became a huge movie.
Yeah,
but then
Breakfast Club.
It's also mixed with those dramatic scenes he was playing with, because Vacation has nothing like that, but he was playing with it in 16 Candles and Pretty in Pink and The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller. And so I think the maturity of John Hughes over that decade to lead to this film has what's aged the best in a lot of ways. I think this is his best movie, and I think it's because it's about adults and not teenagers.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it, and I think it really feels like a quintessential piece because it feels like the best parts of all his other movies, like you said. Like I see a lot of Ferris Bueller in the direction, especially. I think the opening scene at the board meeting actually reminds me a lot of like the scene in the art gallery in Ferris Bueller. And then, like I said, the race scene, Eugene Levy being in it, obviously connection. A lot of Vacation structurally. And then they get two people who have misunderstandings that get to know each other, even though they're from different walks of life, like Breakfast Club. It really feels like he just kind of put everything that he knew into this movie. And it has a lot of tropes. It's not a movie that's going to necessarily surprise you in this day and age. It's very much a odd couple road trip movie like Tommy Boy or any of the others. It has a lot of the same scenes. I don't think it has a scene where they're both singing in the car.
No,
there's scenes where John Candy sings in the car to Ray Charles, but not them singing together.
Tommy Boy has like 4 scenes of that where they're singing in the car. I rewatched Tommy Boy like a few months ago, and I was like, "Oh, Tommy Boy, this is a good movie." It's a very relaxing movie, Tommy Boy. The setting of the Ohio, and then they go on the road together.
For me too, just like growing up with those two actors and seeing them together, it's just very comforting to me.
Oh, it's a different time.
Yeah,
it really is. But what got me with Tommy Boy was I remember the scene where they're listening to the Carpenters, and then it cuts, and then they're both belting it out, which is a trope you see in a lot of movies. But I forgot. There's a montage where they're driving to the final destination, not that final destination, Tommy Boy destination. But they're driving and they sing like 5 songs back to back, like "Come On Eileen." It's like to show that's the point. I mean, it's actually clever, I guess, from a directing standpoint. The scene earlier, they're at odds with each other, then they bond, and then the ending part is demonstrating that they're friends now. So the music is used to demonstrate that.
And it is based on the album by The Who, so it makes sense there's so much music in it.
Yeah, that was originally called Tommy, and they were like, yeah, actually, I would prefer if The Who's album and the film was called Tommy Boy. That's so much.
It feels fitting.
Yeah, because they call him a boy throughout the whole thing. Yeah. He's this child like savant figure.
And Chris Farley as that character.
He's playing pinball against Elton John. That movie's fucking weird, man. I think it's Ken Russell.
Yeah, I think it is. I'm almost positive it is.
Tommy's fucking insane. Like, you hear about movies being weird and you watch them, and I used to chase and be like, nah, sorry. Like, doesn't cut the kid, like I've seen Eraserhead.
Yeah.
Then you watch Tommy and you're like, okay.
Well, it was that weird era where like there's like a popular rock album, like let's make it into a fucking movie.
Yeah, a 2-hour movie too. It's not
and the albums, like the concept albums don't really have to make sense narratively. They just have to make sense emotionally, I think.
Right.
The songs really just have to flow together. You just need clever transitions and you're pretty much set. But to make it into a movie is a completely different side of storytelling than most concept albums use. And I don't think a lot of them translate. I like the movies, but more as like oddities than actually like well-told narratives.
No, it's like a freak show.
Exactly.
Like I don't want to live in this world, but hey, pay a quarter and come behind the curtain and see this. And I'm like, well, they made a Sgt. Pepper's movie with Peter Frampton. I guess I need to check that out. Steve Martin's in that movie too as a mean Mr. Mustard.
Honestly, I actually wish that was the big subgenre instead of the biopic. I'd be much more interested in a Night at the Opera movie than a Freddie Mercury movie.
Yeah, I agree. The album movie instead of like we're gonna do the jukebox thing. It's like a playlist movie. Instead of
Yeah.
you're trying to visualize an album. Um, but yeah, I think that's the big thing I want to get out of the way that we discussed. I do think this is a culmination of his work as a writer. I think it's his maturity with themes. And then obviously just his technical efficiency as a filmmaker from the early stuff to this. Because like Breakfast Club, like not a very well shot, impressive movie. I mean, it's not bad looking. It looks like a TV movie. And then Ferris Bueller, he gets Tak Fujimoto, Jonathan Demme cinematographer, has all these big location shots. I mean, those are epic, exciting, fun shots. Like when they go into Chicago and they're in the car, it's a reason it's iconic. It feels like you're partying. You know, there's an energy to Ferris Bueller. And then this movie comes in and it does have that sort of scope to it. It's got two big actors in it. At this point, Steve Martin's already a legend. John Candy's become more and more famous over the years, being, you know, Second City, and then he's in Stripes and stuff.
There was a saying, you know why they call him John Candy?
He ate a lot of candy.
Because he's so sweet.
Oh, I said like the meanest thing, and then yours was like,
yeah, you should feel bad. He's dead.
Yeah, it's true. Dead from eating candy.
He overdosed on candy.
John, stop eating candy.
You see the crime scene, there's like foam coming out of his mouth. Too many pop rocks.
Yeah. I don't know. It's weird with this movie because it's my thoughts about it as the years have gone on. I don't think about it as a comedy, but it is a comedy. Like when I rewatch it, I forget 90% of the movies.
Like,
jokes. They're gags.
What's so good about the movie is, like you said, with him as a director, just his the way he does set pieces is very impressive. Like the race scene with Kevin Bacon at the beginning, the way the camera shows their eyes lock and they're running, and then Kevin Bacon gets held up, and then Steve Martin trips over the luggage which has Dell's name on it, and then he ends up paying the lawyer guy to take the cab because Kevin Bacon gets in the other one after he trips, and then John Candy Dell gets into that cab, and then as he goes to put Steve Martin goes to put his suitcase into the cab, it's just water in the dirty street because the cab took off, and he chases the cab, and it just milks every scene for the maximum comedic potential. And a lot of the scenes really aren't huge. It's like two men in a hotel room. The scene I want to get to later that really impressed me was just them in the car. The scene where they're driving at night on the highway is just like, there's probably like 10 different bits they do in it. And it's really impressive for just two guys in a car.
Well, that's the thing to break down, because we'll get to the more serious aspects and dramatic aspects in a little bit as it goes on, because that's the stuff I really has stayed with me, obviously. But because you take the comedy for granted because you know the gag so well. Because I've seen this movie like 50 times. And it's honestly, in fairness, I think that's a John Hughes thing where sometimes I feel cynical or like maybe he was overrated. And then I have to remember that, you know, I saw these movies on TV and video so much, and I don't appreciate how funny the gags and the jokes are. Like how impressive it is that he wrote all of these funny things in like 6 movies, like back to back.
In a lot of it too, even like the more trope type humor, you know, the obvious gags, they're delivered and directed so well that it just feels alive. It feels more like in like folk songs when they'll do the same guitar riff and they're all kind of covering each other and borrowing or doing the old standards. But each one, like Bob Dylan has his version, and this guy that you don't know because he's black had that version that Bob Dylan took it from this person, that took it from that person. But they all have their own rendition that feels unique.
Well, yeah, he's really underrated in this sense about writing for character. You know, like sometimes you might notice a little bit if you listen that every Quentin Tarantino character sort of talks like Quentin Tarantino, but actors find a way around it a little bit, but they're all just doing kind of riffs on his thing, the way he talks. With John Hughes, it's really interesting because they're clearly like Ferris is an avatar for him to like express certain ideas or things, the John Lennon stuff and all that. That's all John Hughes talking audios. But he does this in The Breakfast Club and in a lot of his movies. He'll just write different rhythms or dialogue personality types, even if they're very broad, sometimes they are very broad, and he's been criticized for that, long duck dong. But then he'll pitch the performances or cast it. He's really good at casting it to hit those different beats. So like Cameron's like down here on the energy register scale, but he can go up here. And then Ferris is like at a constantly projecting state, but that can also like blur into the background. And he plays with those comedic rhythms and timing. And it's like really impeccable. And in this movie, the fact that it's a twofer, because he usually plays off several people. That's kind of a trick with John Hughes movies. In this movie, the fact that he has to really lean on the two performers and be like, okay, there's going to be side characters that come in that are funny and gags that are going to happen. You know, the redneck guy who shows up to give him the ride and everything.
Yeah.
That's funny. But the fact he leans on the two of them here, I don't know what it is. I just think this is his best directing of actors in association with the source material and what the execution of the film is. You might prefer other premises to John Hughes movies or think that other things have more fun concepts. But I would say that this one is the best executed version of that of one of his films. It's the most, there's faults in his other movies, and I don't really feel that with this movie. I don't have those issues.
Yeah. And I think in all fairness, the ending really ties it together where it's a film that gets better as it goes on. And I don't feel that way about a lot of John Hughes movies. I think a lot of them taper off or they have, some random dance scene or something that just kind of throws off the pacing.
They usually start like awesome.
Yeah.
Like usually the first 20, 30 minutes, there's so much energy. Like Ferris Bueller starts like Goodfellas or something. You're like, holy shit, there's a lot going on in like 10 minutes. And then he always kind of like sneaks in the plot a little bit. And then the movie kind of starts to meander and he makes weird. Even Vacation has that, to be honest, has weird dips.
Yeah. But I think with this, it just has so much heart. And I think really the secret weapon in the movie is casting Steve Martin as the straight guy. Playing off of John Candy.
I always thought he was always gay. So I think
honestly,
I thought you were gonna say playing John Candy playing.
I mean, I could see Steve Martin being gay. I don't think he is, but I could see it.
See, it's weird you say that. That's one of my first hot takes. I have a hot take.
Do you think Steve Martin? You think gay Steve Martin's hot? That turns you on.
That's my hot take. Chad take. No, I'll say this. This got me on the rewatch. I gotta say, I think he nails the comedy parts. I love Steve Martin. Like I couldn't be a bigger fan. I love his comedy. I love his movies.
I think he's an objective genius, like in comedy standards.
Yes, I read his book. I've read 2 of his books. I own 2 of his books. They're both amazing. He's like a brilliant writer. Yeah. He's not a good writer. He's like a great writer. He clearly has read a lot of literature.
I would probably say Born Standing Up is probably the best like autobiography of a comedian.
Insane. And he kind of sneaks up on you emotionally in that book, sort of how this movie does. It's kind of part of the Steve Martin trick. There's always kind of this, I would say Steve Carell has it in 40-Year-Old Virgin a little bit. That's very Steve Martin. There's a sweetness underneath the crudeness of the humor.
Well, that's the thing is when Steve Martin really like when he's like mad about the rental car and he's just going nuts.
Yeah.
He just lets it all out and it's so much more, the comedy's more euphoric or cathartic because he's been so restrained the whole movie.
Yeah. He's a very intelligent comedian, like that stuff. He makes smart comedic choices, and he always makes like even if you go back and watch old Letterman bets with him on them, you're like, God damn it, the stuff he's doing. He's like so deep in character in this bit, and it's the right decision to commit the way he does. Like the jerk that he can play broad, he can be the jerk. You know?
Well, it's almost a Jim Carrey thing. Like his old stand-up comedy with the props and everything was so energetic and off the wall. You think it has to be stupid. But then you break it down and it's kind of philosophical.
Yes.
And it's kind of like performance art in this weird way, but it's so unpretentious that it plays to everyone.
Yeah, I would say the difference is that Jim Carrey eventually became the pretentious version of that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Don't get me wrong. I don't think Ace Ventura is that way. I definitely think like that is not a pretentious movie and performance on any grounds. No, this is my hot take. And I hate to say it because I also think he can do dramatic stuff. He's really good in The Spanish Prisoner, the David Mamet film, which is maybe David Mamet's most entertaining movie. I think I couldn't stop thinking about, because we watched Big Chill, I couldn't stop thinking about like Kevin Kline or something. I feel like it's some of these dramatic scenes. Steve Martin just does it I mean, it's hard to articulate. I just think about faces. There's moments in this movie where he has to deal with these heavy things, and this is basically what he does. He just does like.
I think I know which scene you're referring to when he's at the end, when he's on the train and it's showing the flashbacks and.
Yeah. He does it.
But to be fair, I don't know how you act that scene out otherwise.
They have the fight, even in the fight in the hotel, but we'll get that scene. Yeah. There's a part where Steve Martin, when he's just like, after John Candy gives a speech, Steve Martin's just like, and I just don't. I think about Kevin Kline. I think about like what he could do with it, the texture of it. And I don't blame him. It's a lot to ask of him. I think John Hughes is asking way too much of Steve Martin in those scenes. It's like, you have to facial act the apex emotional moment of the movie a couple times. You have to like, I'm going to let the other guy be the lovable schlub. And then you have to carry all this guilt and internal strife and regret and all that stuff, which is
while coming to a realization and kind of melting your icy heart. And
no, it's on the page. You would think that the one role would be more challenging, but this is one of those movies where I think Steve Martin has the much more challenging part between the two.
Well, on the flip side, you get the scene of John Candy in the car that's burnt down. There's no roof on it, and he's getting snowed on. He's talking to his dead wife. And I was pretty impressed by how it could be really hokey, very script-like, but Candy's delivery makes it seem as though he is just like talking to himself or talking to, a deceased person out loud. And it feels very naturalistic, but he is given words on the page to use in that delivery. He's not just looking at a picture and conveying 16 emotions.
That's exactly it. So I don't think Steve, like I said, comedically, it's hard to think like who could do better than him in the comedy scenes. Cause you made a great point earlier about how it extends every part of the joke. So great thing about this movie is there'll be a gag, an initial gag of like, okay, something happens, like they're in the car, this joke happens. And then another joke happens. And then he'll even stretch that joke out and get like an extra joke. Like the part where Steve Martin pulls his fingers that have been like melted into the dash of the car is like after like several things have happened, like comedically, a bunch of things. And then he still just gets that joke, even adds a little pop sound. It's goofy. And this movie has like 20 scenes like that. It's insane.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing too, is he reuses certain jokes in his other movies, but like I said, in a different, it's kind of a remix album of a movie where like I said, with the running scene, of course, going back to that, but also the vibrating bed from Vacation I picked up on, but you a very different context where John Candy's on the bed alone and he just starts it. And then it pays off because later his beers explode in the bed and in the spot where Steve Martin has to sleep. And he's like, I didn't know the beers were going to blow up. And Steve Martin says, well, it was on a vibrating bed. And he's taking these different things that he used in other movies, but kind of flipping them on their head.
One of the funniest things about Vacation 1 is that a whole subplot and kind of the crux of the movie is that Clark Griswold's going to have an affair. And then his wife's just kind of cool with it.
Yeah, no, that's something that was so weird to me as a kid. I didn't understand. And then the older I get, the more I understand, especially knowing that like it was based on a story that Hughes did for National Lampoon and think about that kind of humor. And then kind of growing to an age where I'm like dad age and being like, oh, that's realistic.
Well, my counter to you in real life is typically your wife's not going to be Beverly D'Angelo.
Yeah.
I mean, I Christy Brinkley's good looking, but if you're just going to ask me like that movie, like who am I into more? It's Beverly D'Angelo, not Christy Brinkley. Like,
but I'd counter to say that a lot of guys who would get Beverly D'Angelo would gladly cheat on her.
Al Pacino. Yeah, I'm just saying the shower scene. I forget about it with Vacation 1. Mm-hmm. And then they come out and you're like,
and she jumps into the pool.
It's like, this is an 80s movie. It's a thing too, like not to get too cumtown with
sexuality,
but
still exists.
Not to get too cumtown with it too, but the fact that she has like nice titties too. It's not that she's not like an A cup, like she's got big boobs. You're like, oh, because you forget you watch the sequels, And you always have to
That's
remind
I
yourself.
kind of forget. I think I have to look it up on Google real quick.
Well, you have to. Well, you have to remember the sequels because they get more family friendly. You have to remember the Griswolds. Where you're like, oh wait, I've seen her boobs.
That is a weird thing with that series and John Hughes as a whole, is that he starts so adult and filthy, and then slowly becomes more child friendly to the point where he's doing. Didn't he do Baby Geniuses?
He did work on it. I don't know how far he went on it, but he eventually at some point was just writing, like he wrote Flubber.
Exactly.
Like it was after Home Alone was huge, because Home Alone was like the movie his whole career built up to, and I think he got super rich from it.
Yeah.
Even with this, you have to think, it's just people forget with John Hughes all the time. It's so easy to. You're like, okay, there's the teen films he did. Oh yeah, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. You're like, oh yeah, he wrote Vacation. He also wrote Christmas Vacation, which came out like the same year, the year after this. So he wrote these screenplays like back to back. That's insane.
That's the power of Coke.
I mean, it's like, it feels that way. Well, the thing you said about earlier, we were talking about the extension of comedy scenes. You brought up how this movie flips or changes things. The genius thing about this movie that I think is what makes it stand out, because all the comedy stuff's solid. It's a funny movie. All those gags are funny. There's some I think are better than others. For the most part, though, like it's got a bunch of funny scenes, and the trope of the two guys at odds with each other works really
you
well.
mentioned the redneck earlier.
Yeah.
You have a two different where one he keeps spitting tobacco and it gets more and more disgusting. He's like retching to get it out, and the reaction. But then he has a line about his wife. He makes her get the luggage. And he says something like, she's little, but she's tough. Her first baby came out sideways. She didn't even scream. and that might be the funniest line in the movie to me, but also it's like, oh, this is Cousin Eddie.
Totally. But what he does in this movie that he doesn't do in those other kind of movies, or at least he attempts to do, he tries to do the sentimental stuff in some of his other films to varying degrees of success. This, on the other hand, he takes the trope of like, okay, the fat, annoying guy and the uptight business guy who's like, out of touch and needs to find his humanity again.
He's a stiff.
And then it happens in that sequence. Because most of the movie, if you don't know, Steve Martin's with John Candy, and Steve Martin's trying to get home for Thanksgiving. And John Candy's a salesman. He sells shower curtain rods in the 80s. And they travel together in different forms of transportation. And they kind of just become road buddies, and Steve Martin hates the John Candy character pretty immediately. And that goes on for a good chunk of the movie. And then they stay in a hotel one night, and Steve Martin just goes off. I mean, he offloads. It's like a 3.5 minute monologue. Like it's one of the biggest fuck yous ever written in a movie, quite honestly. It's mean. It's funny. It feels real. It feels like something somebody would actually say to somebody in a situation like this.
Yeah, well, he talks about how he calls them a miracle. I think it's the funniest part. He says that some people they tell stories that are mildly interesting or funny or entertaining, and none of your stories do any of those things. You're a miracle.
Yeah, he talks about he could go sit in a seminar for days and have a stupid smile on his face, and it would be okay because he survived hanging out with this guy. And at that point, you're watching a comedy and he's going off them, but you're still kind of laughing at that moment. Yeah. It's funny.
It's really good. It's just really good writing. Like comedy lines.
And then it's almost cheaply edited. It's insane how it's done. Like, it's almost like cheap. Where
it's like the Wonder Years.
Where it just flips. It's exactly like that. That's a dead-on comparison. It just flips emotionally manipulating you. All of a sudden, it's just a quiet scene. He rants. It's a comedy. Then out of nowhere, you hear that that Rain Man score that kicks in. You're like, why is this sad music coming on? And then out of nowhere, like, oh yeah, if you want to hurt me, go ahead. If it makes you feel better. And you're like, wait, why is the fat funny guy saying this to him?
What's self-aware?
Yeah, why is he? Wait, he's a person. He's not some stupid. Funny, he's not like Tommy Boy, where he stays kind of a character.
I have that whole quote here. I forgive me if I cry. I say it. You want to hurt me? Go ahead. Go right ahead if it makes you feel any better. I'm an easy target. Yeah, you're right. I talk too much. I also listen too much. I could be a cold-hearted cynic like you, but I don't like to hurt people's feelings. Well, You think what you want about me. I'm not changing. I like me. Or I like me. My wife likes me. My customers like me. So I'm the real article. What you see is what you get.
I know. I'm getting emotional thinking about it. I'm not even kidding. Well, because I've never.
Yeah.
Norm Macdonald talked about this because I don't want to steal it from him, but he's
wasn't that his favorite movie?
And he was right what he said. No movie fucking does this. The movie has everything. It takes a trope. You're totally watching one movie for like 30, 40 minutes, and it's just John Hughes comedy, and it's really working. And then out of nowhere, he breaks down decades of stereotypes about tropes with comedic personas, and then like, no, this guy's a person. He has feelings. He's real. You're being. I mean, there's a lot to break down to because it's complex. I don't think Steve Martin's totally unjustified in his tirade. I think Dale has been kind of an obnoxious asshole, and I think even on some level, John Candy's kind of moralizing and throwing on him a bit, kind of a guilt trip. But man, it's at the same time though. Maybe you never really have a right to go off on another adult. Because you have consent to be like, okay, at some point you could just say, no, I'm not going to go with you. So you did end up in this hotel with this guy. So does that give you the right to call him a fucking asshole and tell him he's a piece of shit? And to flip it like that. But the thing about when John Candy says, because I like Steve Martin in this movie, but it's John Candy's movie. I think he should have got an Oscar nomination for this movie. When he says, I like me, the hesitation in his voice, I don't know.
That's it. That's what gets it.
It's something about him being a big fat guy too, and the way it's shot on his face, like he's a movie star, and he says that, and he's just. It's true.
Well,
it's
it reminds me.
I like me, and he hesitates when he says it. That makes it feel real. I think John Candy's real in that scene.
I remember we were on a walk once, and we saw this overweight kid playing basketball by himself, and we got really emotional. And talking about how sad it was.
It happened.
But, and like, what's really funny?
That's funny thing about
that kid probably had a great day.
That's our Ricky Fitz moment. We filmed back at like basketball. We're crying, showing it to Thora Birch.
Yeah, we're all emotional. He's probably having a good time. He's probably playing in the major leagues right now.
Yeah, he's got a bitch and stuff. We're like two losers walking. We're like, look at that poor kid playing sports.
He's 8 years old. He has a bitch.
I forgot we were so sad. It was like, it was this chubby kid throwing a basket. He was trying to like layups and stuff. We were like, aw. Jesus,
that's almost like a joke a bully would say. Like, when you try to play basketball, you make grown men cry.
But that sequence, because the music, it's so cheap. It's so cheap, the way it's structured. And John Hughes pulls it off. That's the crazy thing about it. I've rarely seen a movie. This should be really dated and bad. But in the same way I feel about Field of Dreams, a lot of movies don't go for sentimentality. A lot of movies kind of avoid them. Especially nowadays, we live in a very cynical. The movies are cynical.
Yeah.
And this movie is like to take that step of like, okay, you were laughing, now I want to make you cry, and I'm making that kind of movie.
I wonder how much that is the thesis of even like our approach to movies. What we're discussing, because we're saying it's emotionally manipulative, and I wonder, are we just people that were formerly brainwashed? That somehow we snapped out of the conditioning and now we're pissed we can't be brainwashed again.
Oh,
like the hypnosis doesn't work, and it's like I want to be manipulated. And we know it's cheap.
Yeah,
and we can't fall under the spell, and we're not like upset. We're just addicts that can't get that high again.
That's why we all still eat at McDonald's. We still want the happy, like it still tastes the same. Like they programmed us as childhood because there was never more advertising directed at kids or toys or cartoons than like 80s.
I think they changed laws.
Oh, it was insane.
All that stuff by now.
But we're just throwing at us. So you want Coca-Cola to be Coca-Cola. You want even the Xbox, even these console loyalties.
Recently, they had Happy Meals for adults.
Yeah.
I'm serious. Like they have it's weird. They all have like 3 sets of eyes and shit, and it's like a weird trippy drug thing from McDonald's. And everybody on my timeline was like sharing. They're so excited for their fucking Happy Meal.
But but I do think that's part of it. But I would say my counter to that. But I agree with you. I think we just missed craft. I mean, they had to put work into manipulate you back then. Now they're like, here's the money we threw at it. We know how to instantly keep you hooked. We know how to.
They'd at least give us a nice meal before they fucked us.
Well, he had to sit down and write that to manipulate you, and he had to come to those emotions because all movies are emotionally manipulative. That's why that criticism's always been odd to me when like, people bring up Spielberg or something. I'm like, well, doesn't Kubrick emotionally manipulate you? Doesn't Bergman emotionally manipulate
That's
you?
my point with our video games art. And it's always like some indie bullshit that like, you know, some like Tumblrina made with an undercut. And it's like, no, this is art because it's like a point and click adventure where you point and you click on the feelings you're feeling. And that makes video games art. And I'm like, that can be art if you want, but it's bad art.
Yeah, it's like
call it what you want.
They're like Shadow of the Colossus makes video games art.
It's more like Shadow of the Colostomy Bag. I never played that game. I don't have thoughts on it.
That scene, though, to get back on track, that scene.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's the best scene of the movie, but I think it's the most important scene in a lot of ways. Because without that transition, the movie isn't what it is, where it does become John Hughes' masterpiece.
That's what's fascinating. Is it takes place. It's literally like entering the second act. And what's so interesting is that like you expect that to be the climactic speech. You think that's what happens like post breakup scene where they reconnect or something, or they have a big fight, then they have the breakup. But it doesn't. It happens early on in the movie, about half an hour in, I'm guessing. And then that shapes the first half's just straight comedy. And the second half has this kind of, you're slowly piecing it together as Steve Martin is, the complexities of this character. Mm-hmm. And it kind of changes everything where you sympathize with him. When you see him, when the train breaks down, and I want to get to the luggage, the chest, because it's such a great prop where it requires two men to carry it, but John Candy's alone most of the movie. So you sympathize with him. It's large and inconvenient like he is, so Del can trip over it at least twice in the movie. It's big enough for two men to sit on it so that they can sit on it together as they watch the car burn. And also, you get that shot of them carrying it together at the end of the movie once they're now friends. So it's a really great, just little visual metaphor. But
so you're saying I get is like Dale's the trunk in a lot of ways. So he's the burden.
Yeah.
Then they find the stability together. He's kind of the cushion. And then in the third act, it's kind of about acceptance, the two worlds coming together.
Exactly. But just a small example is, when Steve Martin, Neil, when he sees Del carrying the trunk all on his own and the one end's dragging in the field and he hurries up and helps him, you as an audience feel that where you're not like, why is he helping this guy? He hates this guy. You understand the sympathy yourself and you sympathize with him. At that point, even if you don't understand where he's coming from, you understand the humanity of it.
Well, that's another thing, that Dale is such a complex and mysterious character for so much of the movie. And the fact he plays with that he's not who he says he is from the beginning. I mean, the craziest thing about this movie, as opposed to other John Hughes movies, where like people have these theories about Ferris Bueller being like Fight Club and Ferris is a manifestation of Cameron's mind. This movie actually has a plot twist. It has an insane final 5-minute plot twist in it, like some M. Night Shyamalan shit at the end of like the Bloody Road movie. And the only thing I want to say made me think about it when you were talking. The only movie I would compare to this that I think may have done some of these things equal to or better, and it didn't occur to me until just now, was Sideways. I think Sideways does a lot of these things, where it's like a trope movie, two guys go on the road and girls, but then like Alexander Payne finds humanity and comedy and iron, and the movie gets deeper as it goes. Like by the time because Sideways, I think we watched that together for the first time, but it's, it's so great. It starts with a knock and it's a comedy scene. And you're like, oh, I'm watching a funny movie. And it's funny for like an hour. Thomas Dane Church, like if people forget, like he's hilarious in that movie. It's very Bill and Ted.
Yeah, my cat's named after him.
Really?
After George of the Jungle, Lyle.
Oh, yeah. No,
the bad guy in George of the Jungle.
Wait, stop, come back. But then in the final scene, he knocks on a door again, and it's like profound. It's like the ending of a novel. You're like, oh my God, holy crap, we got from here to here with this character. But yeah, this movie, I don't know. I've talked to friends about this who've like gotten mixed on John Hughes movies or don't like the stuff like they did when they were a kid. And we talk about this movie, and I've had friends say to me like, I don't know how he made this. I don't know where he got this idea from. Especially that ending. I don't know how you really pull that off or kind of come to that. I don't even know how he came to that.
What's interesting is they dropped a major hint that seems really obvious I've seen it so many times that like I can't remember the first time I saw it or anything. Especially with it being on TV, you see a scene here, a scene there, and eventually you see the whole thing. But there's a scene where they're having breakfast, I believe, or dinner. It doesn't matter the meal, but they're eating out. And Del mentions, "I haven't been home in like 8 years," I think he says. And Neil's like, "Oh shit, really?" And that should have cued you in. Wait, he talks about a wife, but then he says he hasn't been home in years. That doesn't make sense, even if he's a salesman.
It's like Tyler Durden, all the clues in the first hour of Fight Club.
Yeah, like, no, it really is.
It's like, wait, you're just spelling this out. How did I not see any of these things?
Even him talking to his wife in the car, and like the way he refers to her, like when they're drinking in the hotel room, and Neil mentions like, well, at least you've got a wife to grow old with, and he makes kind of a face like it's like fake smiling.
That face is burned into my mind.
Yeah,
that shot. I think he's like, it's just like, because he has another face at the end that's very, I think I'm using this word correctly, lugubrious. When he's at the train station at the end.
Lugubrious means gelatinous.
Oh,
is that?
Yeah, he's a fat piece of shit. I think I used it right. But he's sitting there, and that face too. There's like 4 or 5 facial expressions John Candy does in this that are like forever, all time, like close-ups on somebody's face in a movie or a shot of someone's face in a movie. It's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the last shot of the movie too, but throughout the movie, he does this a few times. You're like, oh my God, John Candy is such a warm, beautiful person. I mean, it's weird. I don't know how else to describe it. There's something just kind of beautiful about his presence and who he is in this movie, especially.
Well, one thing that's interesting about this movie I never picked up on before this viewing was all the side characters know Del.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it feel, you get this sense of him having a past life or something, like when they go in the Doobie cab and it's like this smutty taxi cab service, like pornographic images all over the walls, like in The Shining.
Yeah.
Like the guy knows him. He refers to him by name. The guy at the motel refers to Del by name. The only people that really don't seem to know him are the one truck driver's son who comes to pick them up. Doesn't know Del, and then like the waiters and waitresses at the various places they eat, but that of course they don't. But it seems as though like Del's this loved person. They all have this affection for him, and it's almost as though they have, like, the motel person especially seems to have this like almost sympathy. Maybe I'm reading too far into it, but they almost speak to him at some points in the way you would talk to a widow or someone that you knew a long time that got fucked over in life.
Well, do you have any other notes before we like switch gears to the ending? Is there something you want to talk about?
Yeah, the main thing I wanted to talk about was the car scene.
Okay,
because it really impressed me.
You mean just, I think you mean in the sense of like craft, right? The way it's directed and put together. If it's the one I think.
Yeah, just the whole thing, structured, directing visually and all that.
Because when you said it earlier, it made me think it's things you don't think about until you like kind of try to make stuff. And I'm like, now that I'm thinking about it in my head, I'm like, God, that would be a very hard scene.
Really ambitious
to pull off technically. Like I can see writing it, but if you were actually there, you're like, oh shit.
I started listing it because I just couldn't believe how many twists and turns it took. And this is just like from the point that I picked up on it. So it starts with John Candy adjusting the seat to get comfortable, and eventually he breaks it. Steve Martin puts his wallet in the glove compartment. They have an argument where John Candy says, you bother a lot of things about me. And he talks about Steve Martin playing with his balls too much, which is a funny little, conversation. You get a musical sequence with the mess around. Ray Charles, where John Candy's dancing. He's playing the fucking keyboard on the dashboard. He's smoking, and he throws a cigarette out the window. It flies into the back seat. Del gets both hands on his jacket with a little loop on your jacket. He gets both those stuck as he's driving. So he then has to steer with his knees. Then he sees they get off track, and then they see another car, and it's a couple, and they're waving them on like, you're going the wrong way. And they're like, how would they know where we're going?
That's the funniest line for me. That's such a funny line. They know where we're going.
It is a really good line. Especially because I think Steve Martin says it. He's like, he just woke up, so it's like a tired thought.
Because in my head, it's one of those genius moments where like there's not a better follow-up line to that line. Like you could sit down for hours and try to figure out like
It's like that's the joke. That's the correct answer.
If people were yelling at you like you're going the wrong way, and your response is, "How do they know where we're going?"
So then Dell says, "Oh, some joker wants to race," and then it's revealed they're driving the wrong side of the road. And then there's two semis coming at them. So they have to go between two semis in the middle strip of the road. And the car's getting like smashed between them. It takes both side views off.
Oh, yeah.
And as this is happening, there's an insert shot of Steve Martin as a skeleton and John Candy as Satan. Then they pull over and they're arguing. The car catches on fire, thus burning Neil's wallet. And then it gets into the whole thing about Dell stealing Neil's one card and then putting it back into Neil's wallet. And that's all basically two men in a car. That's all the mileage they got out of that scene. No pun intended.
I mean, when you broke it down like that, it's like I think about stuff that like John Landis is praised for in the Blues Brothers and some other movies. And I even Vacation 1 has some sequences like that. There's the scene where he falls asleep in the car and they drive over all the stuff and stop at a motel. But yeah, the stuff like the insert of him as the devil is just genius.
And that's like Home Alone 2 shit, like Marv turning into a skeleton, but in a much more grounded movie.
Well, it makes you sort of upset because you wonder like what John Hughes could have done more with like the water bandits, for like especially Daniel Stern. You're like, oh, what if that character ended up being kind of likable and not an asshole? Could you know?
Yeah.
Because it's hard for me to like hate Dan. It's always my thing with Home Alone where it's like, yeah, I'm okay if this guy kills the kid. He's great.
Yeah, he's a cool guy.
Yeah, he's a bro. He's got your back. He takes most of the. He's got like a Tom and Jerry thing. Because
that's a good comparison.
Kevin McAllister's clearly Jerry, and he's smiling at the camera. And you should be rooting for the mouse. But that scream that Tom has, if a guy steps on a nail, you're like, oh, I feel bad for that guy. And there is that feeling where Joe Pesci, he's kind of, you don't even give a shit about him. It's odd casting, honestly. It's like, what's Joe Pesci doing in this movie? Let's see where he stops Kevin.
It makes it funnier.
Well, there's a part where he stops him and he smiles. He's like threatening him.
Well, that is the thing, is that Joe Pesci seems like he really would just kill Kevin.
Oh, I wish it was full on. Like if he was just swear, it was like Spider. Yeah, great note. That's a very complex sequence, actually. And
it's the thing is that you take that for granted just casually watching the movie, and then you realize like a lot of scenes in the movie are that way. It's a tight script.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about it. I think this is his best script. It may not be his best directing. I think it's the best. I think in a lot of ways the material serves the directing. Like
and the performances is a huge factor.
Yeah,
the delivery of the lines.
Yeah, because I can't say this is like any better directed than Ferris Bueller or something, even Uncle Buck has a lot of. I actually think Uncle Buck's a very well directed movie. It's just a weird movie, but like the scene where he pulls the drill out and stuff, though, that stuff looks good. Or they're at the bowling alley. But what makes this movie different? Obviously, it's the ending, which is. I mean, as a kid, I really took it for granted. I understood it as a kid, but then like it was sort of that Groundhog Day thing where like, as I got older, I was like, oh, wow, this is like an existential film about like Buddhism and the meaning of life. And there's Jewish stuff in here. And then with this movie, as a teenager, the ending part, I started to be like, holy shit, I really took this for granted. And then now I watch it and I'm like, what an amazing achievement by everyone involved.
I think what makes it work is the simplicity of it. And I think it really benefits from having some of the best Thanksgiving photography that I've seen in a movie. It's so weird. It looks like something out of a commercial when she's like buttering the turkey and pulling it out of the oven. It looks like heaven. It actually reminds me, like, is this movie? I know that every movie kind of does this, but it felt like the Odyssey, where like Odysseus is getting back to his wife, and instead of a bunch of men there to fuck her, it's just a heavenly scene. It's Paradiso, but it is that thing where it's like what you are sold, the image of Thanksgiving you're sold, but kind of brought to life.
I'm glad you brought that up so much, because that has stayed with me for so long over the years. Is those shots?
Yeah.
because I want to talk about this. I timed it. I looked at the time. This is 7 minutes. This is the final 7 minutes of this movie. The way you talked about the car scene, this all happens
Mhm.
within that time frame. They hug, and Steve Martin says the thing about I got a lot wiser, and he gets on the train. He's relieved. John Candy's waving at him. You pretty much think the movie's over. I mean, I would
Yeah.
be shocked if he got home and the credits started rolling. Especially in 1987. Let's say you're sitting in the theater watching this movie. You probably think the movie's wrapping up here. And he starts having these flashes of his family, and the way it's shot. There's a moment where the candles. It almost looks like Kubrick in some of these shots, and they're looking across from each other at the table. It's got this Barry Lyndon light. I mean, it's gorgeous. And the shot of his kid, his like daughter smiling and stuff.
Yeah.
And then he starts to piece something together in his head, information. And I used to think this was cheap, but watching it now, I go, actually, no, it's believable. He's a smart guy. Something feels weird. And then you start to
And I
figure
think
it
we've all
out.
had that moment
Totally.
where it may not be the moment after, but you think about someone or a situation and you kind of piece together, oh, this was the missing piece that fell off the whole time.
I have that with a lot of kids I went to school with, like childhood, and you think back and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, your parents, you had a terrible life. I realize that now. Like, I
Yeah.
understand you a lot more now. Or that they were poor and maybe you didn't understand how serious that was when you were a kid, like what being poor is.
Just not understanding other people's struggles and then becoming more empathetic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because you don't think about other people's home lives when you're a kid.
No.
That's a waste.
Why would
of-
you care?
Yeah, you have no stock in anything. You're just trying to like days are fun when you're a kid. You don't have like a scope
Yeah.
of like the year. So it goes from that, and then he starts thinking about the relationship with Dale, reliving. It's kind of a clip show thing, and you think, oh, he's coming to realize he likes
Mhm.
this guy and all that. It's going to end on a happy note. Then all those lines that you brought up earlier, those little Fight Club clues, he starts like having flashes, and then man, he runs back to the station. John Candy's sitting there with this lugubrious face, and
And Steve Martin kisses him.
it's that shot. It's that shot like of just the wide of John Candy sitting on the bench.
Yeah, alone.
And he just turns. He's like, and then he goes over and talks to him, and he reveals that once again, this isn't 7 minutes. He reveals that the wife has been dead for 8 years. He has no home. He's traveling. So this movie is about a homeless guy that goes around selling stuff, stays on the road because he's had some psychological breakdown after his wife died. And he has like no close family or friends apparently. And his friends and family are the road. And he's this completely broken, sad figure. And Steve Martin then, after hearing this, is a guy who took his family for granted in a lot of ways and almost made this mission to go see them almost have like a obligation of like, I can do this, as opposed to really being emotional about seeing the family. And then I believe this moment when he hears this makes him realize the value of those things. It
Yeah.
flips the script on him. It's a very heavy moment, actually, which is why I think it's very tough that Steve Martin has to facially react to that moment. And then once again, the music all of a sudden flips from the sad score to Every Time You Go, and it's them walking the trunk to the house, and you go like the gambit of emotions, because you're pretty much going to cry. You're sad in that scene, and then the happy tears that immediately juxtapose that in that Field of Dreams, Wonder Years way. And he goes to the house and he introduces the family. Even when he opens the door and the kid's like, "Daddy," it's too much.
Yeah,
It's-
I
it's
think
too
the
goddamn
movie
much.
benefits from a lot of pathos that is cut from the movie, I wonder. And that's something I wanted to bring up. I feel it's really a responsibility to bring up is that extra hour cut from the film that I guess is recently announced that they found somehow.
Yeah, I saw a
and are
video
releasing,
about that.
which-
Yeah.
Is exciting. It's good to have more information is always better. More information is never bad, historically speaking. But there's always that thing where I think that the legacy of the movie is better, not seeing the hour footage. And I do wonder that if we see it, it might take something away, because the movie seems to have all these understated things. It feels very simple and honestly just kind of elegant, just kind of beautifully edited and paced. Like you said, it flips the tone um, just so quickly, but so efficiently that I wonder if an extra hour will benefit or if the implied extra hour gives it this kind of subtext that we just pick up on somehow.
There's an implication of life outside of what you see in the movie.
Exactly. Yeah. It makes the characters feel deeper. The big thing is with the wife.
Yeah, there's an affair subplot that was cut. And that's why she's so emotional and crying at the end when he shows up. And then she realizes he wasn't lying and he's actually was on the road with this guy, which I actually like that idea. But I get what
I do too.
I get why you would cut it though, because like, is it necessary? The movie's about these two guys. It's really not about the relationship with the wife or her.
No, we don't need any fucking women ruining our movie.
Well, because even that, the family being kind of distant. So when you do get to them at the end, it's where I think Home Alone
the idea
fails.
Of the family.
Like, I don't think when Kevin's mom gets out of the van and him and her reunite, it has this emotion. It doesn't for me. I like Home Alone as a comedy, as an entertaining movie, but I don't think that moment works at all. I think it's like, and I also think it makes no sense. That hurts it. It's like, well, this doesn't make any sense.
Well, I think John Candy being in Home Alone is something that's worth addressing too.
Big time.
Because I think he's a standout in that movie. And he's the person that gets her home.
I love that movie. I love that version of that movie where it's the kids left home and the mom has to go with the guys in the van.
Actually, no, that's a good point. With I'm forgetting that actress's name right now because that's how it is when you're recording. Names just do not exist anymore.
We know who she is though.
But yeah, exactly. From Beetlejuice and everything, from Schitt's Creek. Her and John Candy in a road trip movie, because you don't see that where it's a man and a woman on a road trip movie and it's platonic and it's like an odd pairing type thing. That would be an interesting comedy dynamic, I think.
I agree. There isn't a lot of it's
always very sexual where it's like, I'm not attracted to this person. They're crazy. Oh, I love them. But you never see it just like friends or strangers.
Yeah, it usually is the Sure Thing was a remake of it. I can't think of the name of the damn movie right now. I think it's a Clark Gable where they're on the. Is it Happened One Night? But it's the trope where like, oh, they go on the road trip and then they fall in love, as opposed to a man and a woman just becoming closer friends over the course.
Yeah, just a human understanding by the end of it.
Which is, I think, would happen in most cases. I don't think if you went on a road trip with somebody, you would automatically fall. You know, the like when Harry Met Sally thing, when they're talking at the beginning in the car, that scene's so great. But then they're friends for life. And then at the end, they fall in love. And it's also kind of like, well, I like that ending. I do. But it's like, why can't they just be friends? Like,
exactly.
Why can't they just be people that were friends? And the movie could be about that like men and women could be friends. But the movie's thesis at the end is like, you're either friends with them, you're either fucking them, or you love them. And it eliminates the friend option at some point.
Yeah.
You know, it's like this doesn't even the show Friends. I laugh about that show. They all become lovers over the course of the show. Yep. Nobody builds a life. Eventually, their lives just these same 6 people stayed in this circle for like after college. Nobody was like, well, I'm going to move to this other part of the city. It's like, I'm moving across from you. Ross lives across from us.
It would be a funny idea for a modern sitcom where it's friends, but it's like a Full House where it's like because of the economy, they all chip in on a house. There's 6 of them living together, and then it makes sense because they're all broke. But instead they have these like huge apartments.
They have like mansion apartments. I like the thing you said about the elegance. That's what the way he uses the score. The way it's shot, like even the image of the train, the very John Hughes Chicago thing, but having it be this emotional scene.
Well, even what hit me was it's really strange because it's so. I think most people wouldn't notice it, and it might not mean anything. But the bird's eye view of John Candy at the train station after Dell leaves, and then it's almost Hitchcockian. It takes me back to like North by Northwest.
Totally,
and then like. When Steve Martin gets off the train and runs, it's a bird's eye view too. For some reason, it just makes. I know it's the intention of the shot, but it just makes him look so small, despite being such a big, imposing figure the whole movie. Where he's taking up too much space, he's annoying, and then he just looks like a small, lonely man where there's nobody else in the shot. Of course, he's completely alone.
That's exactly right. I thought about that too. So at the end. They hug everybody. He kisses the wife. And, you know, there's that scene, you know, hello, Mrs. Page. Goddamn, there's just that fucking song. If it comes on the radio, if I'm in the car and it comes on, I think of this. It's one of those weird
In
things.
the freeze frame.
I think about him gripping the hat with the hand and the.
I know, yeah, because he's uncomfortable and he's scared. Which the whole movie, he's making other people uncomfortable, and then at the end, he's in a normal situation, and that makes him feel uncomfortable.
But just I know a lot of it. This has to be said. A lot of weight that was added to this movie over the years because John Candy died when we were. I mean, you were probably born when John Candy died, or I was really
same day.
I was I was like a little kid, you know. I mean, it was in the early 90s. He died in like 93 or something.
Yeah.
So a song saying every time you go away, you take a piece of me with you, and the last shot of the movie is of John Candy, who's this like tragic death. That does adds. I don't know if the movie's quite the same if John Candy's still alive and making movies. I don't, because I think he would have done variations of this in his career.
It makes the character of Dell seem more mythological too.
Yes.
Where he's like a legend. Like it's like that the hitchhiker who you pick him up and then he's a ghost or whatever.
Totally.
It has that vibe. And that's one thing I want to say about the movie, because I remember I had a thing where I was looking for Thanksgiving movies one year. And this is one of the few great Thanksgiving movies. You get a lot of Halloween movies, a lot of Christmas movies, but Thanksgiving doesn't get enough.
Well, it makes it a very American movie, too.
Yeah.
Even though it's got European sensibilities to it, unlike some other John Hughes films, I think some of that elegance isn't very American. Or at least it wasn't at the commercial time what movies kind of were like. It definitely reminds me of Rain Man a lot. I think a lot of the editing and score stuff is a lot like Rain Man and what Barry Levinson did.
The score I picked up on some of that.
Well, it's just that modernism coming in the late 80s with some of the film.
Yeah.
The editing's getting a little bit more complex, that they can cut a scene together like that train station sequence with Steve Martin. I think a lot of that's just it being 1987 and movies were starting to look more like the 90s. Like if this movie came out in 1990, I don't think it would be that different. At least technically. I just love the message. I mean, a lot of movies you can break down thematically and add this way, and sometimes the essayist community or the art house bro cinema chads, you know, you'd be like, okay, let's talk about Tarkovsky, let's talk about the meaning of these shots, let's break down all the layers about Pasolini and stuff like that. And I've watched these videos or read these essays. And stuff like this never gets a deep analysis because thematically what it says at the end is so simple. But I think people underappreciate that about great works and pop art in general. The message of this movie at the end, which is a way more valuable lesson than you're going to learn from most films that are trying to like teach you a history book or a philosophy book's worth of understanding and information. Like you're supposed to intellectualize everything. This is just saying like you meet people in life, they're in bad situations. Shitty stuff happens to people. This guy's homeless. His life's kind of falling apart. And Steve Martin's character is there for him. He helps him out at the end. You know, he's just... And I'm not cynical about that stuff. Like, it's almost like saying to the audience, like, I could be a cynical asshole like you. Like, John Hughes is saying that to us through the Dale character.
Yeah, well,
and then at the end,
I
it's
wonder
like,
too.
Not cynical. It's the most, like, happy, kind of positive way to look at people in life. And I love that about this movie.
Yeah. I think you're right. It is talking to the audience in that way where it's like you judging this character and then coming to understand the character yourself. But I would say in terms of like the video essayists and all that stuff, I don't think it's an intellectual thing. I don't think they all love Tarkovsky and Nolan and Villeneuve and all that just as much. And they just happen to come to all the same conclusions and make the same points. And I think they enjoy that. They probably do to some degree, because otherwise, why would you get into that field? But I think there's much more cottage industry aspect to it. I think it's much more, everything everywhere all at once. That video that someone did got 1 billion views. So I'm going to do one hoping to catch some of that. I think it's much more commercialist.
Trend hopping. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Mr. Beast does a video, so everybody does their like cheaper variation. It's the same thing with like everybody did a video essay on Drive. Back in the day, and everybody made the same points. Like, oh, he's referencing Plato when he gets stabbed with the shadow at the trunk of the car. You know, and it's like, well, that was obvious when I saw it in the theater. And then there's 25 video essayists saying that.
Yeah, I mean they're doing it because they're trying to make a living off it. They want to make money, and I don't blame them. I just think it's pathetic and sad.
Well, my counter to that, and it's something. It's just maybe it's because I'm a big softie, but I'm much more impressed just being a writer or like having tried to make stuff. I think it's so much harder to do stuff like The Wonder Years or Field of Dreams or like this. I think it's James Cameron. I heard James Cameron in an interview. Just before we started doing this, I was watching an interview and he was talking about Leonardo DiCaprio and Titanic, and it made me think about this. Where Leo came and he said, "Hey, me and my dad were looking at the script," which is funny. And he's like, "Hey, we think that the Jack character should have like more going on. Like maybe he's got a drug problem. Maybe he's got some struggle with like family stuff. So like, just some depth I can add here that I can kind of pull from. Maybe he's got a limp from this past." And James Cameron stopped and he's like, no. He's like, you don't understand. He was like, and it hit me how he said this. He's like, this isn't Richard III or anything like that. He was like, that stuff's easier. He was like, that's a crutch. He's like, you can lean on that. You can lean on those little things and then use the words. He's like, you have to just be there and do nothing and make it work. He's like, that's harder to do. He's like, I'm just going to film you and your presence has to be enough. You're just broad and you have to be a movie star. And he was like, Leo didn't understand that until he told him that. I think people don't get that. I think people think like, oh, because you hear comedians say this all the time. They're like, oh, it's just as hard to do comedy as it's drama. No, it's not. That's wrong. You know, Charlie Sheen was the only one I heard answer that honestly. He's like, are you kidding me? He's like, Platoon was way harder to do than Major League. It's way harder. Yeah. I'm not saying to come up with the comedy, but, you know.
Well, it's always people standing up for themselves that say that. You're never going to hear like a drama person say, oh, it's much harder to do comedy. I have it easy. They're always on their own team.
Yeah, well, I never get when people say that because, like, okay, I think about all the great performances ever in movies. There's a lot of them that are comedy performances, like Gene Wilder and Willy Wonka, but like, yeah, do I think that's as hard as like the stuff that's in most of those really dramatically wrought movies? Like, do I think that's like as hard as it is like what they're doing in The Godfather or something? And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, or like a Bergman movie where most of it's just like talking to the face shots. Like some Bergman movies, that's like a third of the runtime.
Yeah,
is an actress's face,
and the actor just has to. Yeah, the performance in Joan of Arc, especially.
Yeah,
you know, it's just on her face, and it's like, you know how hard that is. Like to do that as opposed to like you have a lot of material and there's a lot working for you. Like, oh, the Shakespeare is good. Well, it's like, well, yeah, you're reading Shakespeare like that. That kind of does the work for you in a lot of ways if you know how to act. Where it was something like this, he has to really hit this moment. He has to hit this moment of the ending, and it has to work with that close up on John Candy's face. And that's all John Hughes really has. He doesn't have a lot of. He has the ending trick up his sleeve, but he really doesn't have a lot of cards to play. At that point in the movie.
Well, one thing too is that, and this isn't a joke, but like John Candy's face isn't conventionally something one would see as cinematic.
No,
he's not a Brad Pitt. He's not this traditionally beautiful face. But I think what John Hughes captures in the movie is that, you know, he's a very endearing, charming, funny person, but he kind of brings out like his soul.
Yeah,
and that's what you see at the end of the movie. You see a beautiful soul in a face that you wouldn't expect to see it in.
Yeah, I agree. It's just a great movie. It's one of the most rewatchable movies probably ever made. It's one of the most consistently kind of funny comedies in the 80s. A lot of 80s movies I've noticed in recent years, like while they're still good, a lot of them it's like, okay, maybe some of this stuff is dated, not to be woke or anything, but it's like this kind of joke or character doesn't work anymore in a modern.
Well, like
context.
How often do you watch Porky's anymore? You know?
Yeah, you can't take Porky. No, totally. You're like, it's impossible. That's a great one to point out. And there's some of the action movies, but this movie doesn't have that. I don't want to say it's timeless because it is very much like of its time. It's very much like a Reagan era movie.
I think it's such a clever movie. The script is so cleverly written with jokes. Like there's the one thing in the hotel room where John Candy says, I even let you pay for the room so you wouldn't feel like an intruder, which you are. It's clever humor. The writing has got a lot of great lines. The physical humor is clever. The set pieces are built. Like we went over the structure earlier. It's got the sentimentality and sweetness and heart to it, which gives it pathos. So it's really just a very well-made movie in terms of it's well thought out. It may not be complex in the way Inception is or something, but in terms of like craftsmanship, it's very well constructed vessel.
Yeah, I think that's the way to think about it. His ideas going into the movie were so well thought out. And maybe he found it while he was making it. Maybe it was in the cutting and he sort of found that stuff about it. The like, oh, if I take stuff out, it's actually going to make this dramatic. Because maybe he had more of that dramatic stuff and the balance wasn't there between the comedy.
That's what I wonder.
And then he's like, oh, wait, I have a really good comedy here that's like 90 minutes. And then I could just add like 5 minutes of some dramatic stuff, sprinkle it in there. Because there's a weird moment here to think about. This almost hints at the fact that John Hughes could have been more of a dramatic filmmaker, but his bones were in comedy, and that's where he made his money. But you watch this, because most of the time I don't think that way. There's some scenes in Ferris Bueller, like Cameron's, Alan Ruck's acting, where you're like, man, this is really good. You know, it kind of feels like Cameron Crowe or something for a second. You're like, this is really well, like, you know, the scene about the dad and everything, that's well acted.
I even think some things in 16 Candles and Pretty in Pink, you get that kind of melodrama in there, but it's a teen version of it.
Yeah.
So it's a little more angsty and immature, but it's there.
Totally.
Where it is supposed to be taken seriously in certain moments.
16 Candles, totally. I love 16 Candles. I still do. Even a lot of stuff like isn't politically correct anymore. Out of those teen movies, the one that I actually think is like funniest and that I just have a heart for. There's even a scene where Molly Ringwald's sitting in the hallway outside the dance. And there's a song playing in the background called Growing Pains that nobody remembers from the 80s. And it's only for like 15 seconds. And she's sitting there and these people come up. There's just moments like that, 16 Candles. And I think about so many like indie teen films or coming of age films I like later, TV shows. And you're like, oh, so much of that is in this moment. That's just like 15 seconds. And he like, if he didn't create it, he got it to the point where it's like, this is what the standard is.
Well, the famous scene even of the silhouettes with the birthday cake and by the window. I mean, that's not a funny scene. There's no gag there.
No, it's beautiful.
That's just a romantic moment.
Yeah. No,
straight.
Yeah, super. Yeah, even though that character's like the biggest asshole.
Yeah.
But just got the guy at 16 Candles. I don't know. This is just it has all the quality of the comedy. Maybe when you're younger, the teen stuff relates. Obviously, like the Ferris Bueller stuff's cool or the 16 Candles stuff is cool. But as an adult, those movies to me seem like more so fantastical. This one, I think, is pretty close to truth in some ways, in universal ways. I understand as a man, as an adult man, what these two guys go through and kind of the relationship that they form. And then where the Steve Martin character in particular gets at the end of the movie makes sense. There's almost this weird, like, it almost reminds you of like Japanese films or something. There's things to do with honor and wisdom. And your responsibility as a man and your bond with other men. There's like these little hints of that in here because it's almost like
I also think
these two guys in a situation and they have to like solve the situation.
It's funny. It is almost like a samurai journey type. You can picture it.
Totally.
But the idea of two samurai journeying together, they're strangers, and one of them's trying to meet his family. And the whole time his objective is he's angry because he's separated from his family. He wants to go back and see them. He's impatient to see them and constantly inconvenienced by these minor things that set him back, nickel and diming his time away from them. And he's with someone else, and he realizes at the end of his journey that this other person doesn't have these things at all. And he's angry. I want to see my family. I want to see them now. And he's saying all this to someone who doesn't have a family at all.
This would have been a great Kurosawa movie, and I know it sounds funny, but if you think about like Hidden Fortress, because this is what shocked me when I first.
Well, I'm imagining the three nouns that the Kurosawa, it'd be horses, boats, and I don't know what else.
Well, because you got to think, because you really don't know. Maybe the one guy is trying to get home, and then he's with like a fatter, obnoxious samurai, a joking character, and then there's that tragic scene halfway through, and he's like, you know, I'm a real samurai. And then it gets to the end and he finds out that his wife died years ago and he has no home. And then he brings it back to his house. Like you could see that.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is if this was a Kurosawa film and it had this, that people would call it a masterpiece. and then John Hughes makes in the 80s. It has Steve Martin and John Candy. And this is a beloved
Boats,
film.
horses, and feet.
I love this movie, though. I think it's a great film. I used to think it was a really good movie. I used to think of it as like an 8 out of 10, like a solid, 8 out of 10 movie for the most part. But now I'm kind of in this like, is this like a 10 or a 9.5? Is this just like almost a perfect movie?
That's the thing, and that's where I'm open to the new footage, but it feels just kind of perfect as it is. It has a grace to it, I think, that only movies that are saved in editing have.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that the best movies have like 2 hours of deleted footage on the cutting floor, where it's like they just got so much and took the cream of the crop, but sometimes that works.
Well, you think about it in this way. I mean, a lot of novels are much denser before they get edited down into their final form. And I don't think we think about movies in that context usually, because they think about time. The book, it's not like, oh, you have to write this in 3 days or, you won't get this finished. So I think sometimes those directors, because Woody Allen does that too, I think when they get that, when they don't go too crazy with the budget and they're like, oh, I can spend the time on this. And I could, like even Richard Linklater doing Boyhood for so cheap, he shot it over 12 years. You could tell watching that movie, he kind of found the material and the structure and what worked about it over time. He's like, oh, actually, I have this and this works and I can capitalize on this. And I just don't think most people get that opportunity to even do that.
To use the obvious example, imagine if Stephen King cut down all of his books and he gave it the Annie Hall treatment with It. How much better of a book would It be? Yeah, if it was like 300 pages shorter.
Yeah, most of his big books, if they were like half or even more, like if they were all 300, 400 pages long, you'd be like, it's probably a pretty good book. And I would think about things about it, but he gives you every single possible detail that you could get. Well, I was thinking about
that's why short stories are the best.
When you hear actors talk about, how like directors will give them this page of all their character background things, but it's not in the movie. Like Tarantino will give a actor. But it's like Stephen King. He's just like, nope, that's going in. And it's like, I don't know if I really needed that for, the guy who runs the store downtown.
Well, I used to defend it in the sense that, like, I remember people in high school would say, I don't need to know what the character ate for breakfast. I don't need to know this or that. And I was like, well, it doesn't have to, every scene doesn't have to be a scare. Every scene doesn't have to drive the plot forward. You can have a character moment. You can have a world building moment. My issue with Stephen King is that it's often just not good. There's a quality inconsistency as well as a pacing issue.
That's exactly it. Do you have anything more to say?
Nah.
Okay. Well, that was Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Thank you for being on this episode with me, Chad. And I would like to say happy Chadsgiving to you on Thursday. I hope you stuff plenty of bitches.
Yep, as always.
Get that cranberry sauce going. That pumpkin pie. You're gonna. This is honestly kind of sentimental for me, though. This is the first Thanksgiving I'm having with family back home in probably 5 years. I was in a city for the last 5 years, and my Thanksgivings were usually with 1 or 2 people. So I haven't. Well,
I think that might be a big factor with this movie. Is with the jobs that I've worked, I've never gotten the opportunity to go home for Thanksgiving, basically since leaving home for college. There's been a few years here and there where I've gotten the chance to, but it's for the most part that hasn't been an option, just something available to me. So then I remember 2 years ago, I watched this on Thanksgiving, so I couldn't go home and see family. And then it really hit me that year watching it without, just being alone on Thanksgiving.
Well, I think if there's something that this movie has to it that ties into what happens with John Candy character, it is about it's about getting home, whatever that represents. Like, even if it's not literally like your home, but this idea of one. A place of comfort and safety and familiarity.
Or having a home to go back to.
Yeah, somewhere to go back to. Yeah, and this movie kind of plays with the idea of you can never go back home, although that's about revisiting childhood stuff. But the fact that, he lets the Dale character into his home at the end and brings him into it and stuff like that. That's what... that's what's powerful, because that's what makes it the best Thanksgiving movie, is because before everything got politicized, now they're like cancel Thanksgiving. It's about the slaughter of the Native Americans.
Yeah.
Or like cancel Christmas. That's stole from pagans. It's happy holidays. F you. Cancel. Everything fun has to be gone. So
Yeah.
this movie, we were young and Thanksgiving was like, oh, be thankful for things. Be thankful for people. You get together with family. This guy's really thankful for what he has at the end of the movie, and he shares it with somebody else, which is what Thanksgiving
Well, that's
is supposed
what's
to be
kind of
about.
great is it doesn't feel preachy, and it subtly gives you the message or the themes of Thanksgiving throughout the course, while not really feeling like a Thanksgiving movie until the final scene.
Yeah, it really doesn't. I mean, I guess there isn't a Thanksgiving vibe. It's like Christmas dinner. It's like it's like the playoffs to Christmas. You're just getting ready. It's like it's, I guess, the fall sort of thing. But you're right. It is like actually a Thanksgiving movie. You just kind of don't realize it's a Thanksgiving movie, and he shocks you so much with the ending that you're not thinking about it as a Thanksgiving movie at that point. When that's totally when it becomes a Thanksgiving movie.
Exactly. I think that's what makes it so good is like, Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving or something is very Thanksgiving the whole time, but you kind of experience the message of it more organically because it doesn't sell itself as a Thanksgiving movie. You just watch it as a comedy and you slowly get kind of, submerged in Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I agree. All right, that was Cinema Chats. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Please donate on the donation button there. Give us some money so we can keep doing this. And we will be coming back. Our next movie is going to be Risky Business. We're going to change things up a bit going into the next month and start rotating guests in and kind of just be doing more random movies. I don't think we're really going to have a theme for December.
Chad here, coming at you from the Muscle Dungeon. Just wanted to give a PSA real quick on importance of exercise. The importance of exercise. You gotta get at least 30 minutes of physical activity in every day. Trust me, when you do, you'll feel so much better. Oh God. I've never felt better in my life.